The Battle of Imphal took place in the region around the city of Imphal, the capital of the state of Manipur in northeast India, from March until July 1944. Japanese armies attempted to destroy the Allied forces at Imphal and invade India, but were driven back into Burma with heavy losses, together with the simultaneous Battle of Kohima on the road by which the encircled Allied forces at Imphal were relieved. The battle was the turning point of the Burma Campaign, part of the Southeast Asian theater of the Second World War. The defeat at Kohima and Imphal was the largest defeat to that date in Japanese history. The situation. At the start of 1944, the war was going against the Japanese on several fronts. They were being driven back in the Central and Southwest Pacific, and the merchant ships were under attack by Allied submarines and aircraft. In Southeast Asia, they had held their lines over the preceding year, but the Allies were preparing several offensives from India and the Chinese province of Yunnan into Burma. In particular, the town of Imphal in Manipur on the frontier with Burma was built up to be a substantial Allied logistic base, with airfields, encampments and supply dumps. Imphal was linked to an even larger base at Dimapur in the Brahmaputra River Valley by a road which wound for 100 miles through the steep and forested Naga Hills. Imphal was held by the 4th Corps, commanded by Lieutenant General Geoffrey Scoones. The corps was in turn part of the British 14th Army under Lieutenant General William Slim, because the Allies were planning to take the offensive themselves. The corps units were thrown forward almost to the Chindwin River and widely separated, and were therefore vulnerable to being isolated and surrounded. 20th Indian Infantry Division under Major General Douglas Gracie occupied Tamu, 110 kilometers southeast of Imphal. The division wasn't tried but well trained. 17th Indian Infantry Division under Major General Punch Cowand occupied Tidam, 243 kilometers south of Imphal, at the end of a long and precarious line of communication. The division, which had 2 brigades only, had been intermittently in action since December 1941. 23rd Indian Infantry Division under Major General Uvrai Roberts was in reserve in and around Imphal. It had served on the Imphal front for 2 years and was severely under strength as a result of endemic diseases such as malaria and typhus. 50th Indian Parachute Brigade under Brigadier Maxwell Hope Thompson was north of Imphal, conducting advanced jungle training. 254th Indian Tank Brigade under Brigadier R.L. Scoones was stationed in and around Imphal. The Indian divisions were composed of both British and Indian personnel. Each division was supported by 2 field artillery regiments and 1 Indian mountain artillery regiment. Japanese plan. In March 1943, the Japanese command in Burma had been reorganized. A new headquarters, Burma Area Army, was created under Lieutenant General Masakazu Kawabe. One of its subordinate formations, responsible for the central part of the front facing Imphal and Assam, was the 15th Army. Lieutenant General Renya Mutaguchi was appointed to command this army in July 1943. From the moment he took command, Mutaguchi forcefully advocated an invasion of India. His motives for doing so appear to be complex. He had played a major part in several Japanese victories, ever since the Marco Polo Bridge incident in 1937, and believed it was his destiny to win the decisive battle of the war for Japan. He may also have been goaded by the First Chindit Expedition, a raid behind Japanese lines launched by the British under Order Wingate early in 1943. The Allies had widely publicized the successful aspects of Wingate's expedition while concealing their losses to disease and exhaustion, possibly misleading Mutaguchi and some of his staff as to the difficulties they would later face. Mutaguchi planned to exploit the capture of Imphal by advancing to the Brahmaputra Valley. This would cut the Allied lines of communication to the front in northern Burma, where the American-led Northern Combat Area Command was attempting to construct the Ledo Road to link India and China by land. and to the airfield supplying the nationalist Chinese under Chiang Kai-shek via an airlift over the hump. Although the staffs at Burma Area Army and at Southern Expeditionary Army Group had reservations over the scale of Muta Gussi's proposed operation, they were eventually won over by his persistent advocacy. Finally, Prime Minister Hideki Tojo and Imperial General Headquarters gave their approval to the plan. Muta Gussi intended to isolate and destroy the Allied units in their forward positions and then capture Imphal. His plan was named Yugo, or Operation C. In detail, the Japanese 33rd Infantry Division under Lieutenant General Genzo Yanagita would surround and destroy the 17th Indian Division at Tidam, then attack Imphal from the south. Yamamoto Force, formed from units detached from the Japanese 33rd and 15th Divisions under Major General Tsunoru Yamamoto, would destroy the 20th Indian Division at Tamu, then attack Imphal from the east. The force was supported by the 14th Tank Regiment, equipped with 66 assorted tanks, under Lieutenant Colonel Nobuo Ueda, and the 3rd Heavy Artillery Regiment under Lieutenant Colonel Kazuo Mitsui. The Japanese 15th Infantry Division under Lieutenant General Masafuma Yamauchi would envelop Imphal from the north. This division was still arriving from road-building duties in Thailand and was under strength at the start of the operation. In a separate subsidiary operation, the Japanese 31st Infantry Division under Lieutenant General Kotoku Sato would isolate Imphal by capturing Kohima on the Imphal-Dimapur road, and then advance to Dimapur. At the insistence of Subhash Chandra Bose, leader of the Azad Hind, the Indian National Army made a substantial contribution. Units of the 1st Division covered the left flank of 33rd Division's advance. The 2nd Guerrilla Regiment was attached later in the battle to Yamamoto Force. The Special Services Group, redesignated the Bahadur Group, acted as scouts and pathfinders with the advanced Japanese units in the opening stages of the offensive. They were tasked to infiltrate through British lines and encourage units of the British Indian Army to defect. All of Muta Gussi's divisional commanders disagreed with the plan to some extent. Sato distrusted Muta Gussi's motives, and Yanagita openly derided his abrasive superior as a blockhead. Yamauchi was already very ill and fatalistic. Their main reservations concerned supply. Muta Gussi had assumed that success would be achieved within 3 weeks, but adequate supplies after that period could be obtained only if the Japanese captured Allied supply dumps, as the torrential rains that the spring season would inevitably bring would make supply routes from the Chindwin impossible to traverse. Gambles such as Muta Gussi was making had worked in the past, but could no longer be relied upon. Given nearly total Allied air superiority in the area and the improvement in morale and training of British and Indian troops, Muta Gussi proposed to use Genghis Khan rations, driving herds of buffalo and cattle rounded up throughout northern Burma across the Chindwin as meat rations on the hoof. However, most of these beasts died from lack of forage and the meat rotted many miles from the troops they were intended to supply. There were other weaknesses in the plan, which were revealed as the campaign progressed. The Japanese assumed that the British would be unable to use tanks on the steep jungle-covered hills around Imphal. For ease of movement and supply, the Japanese left behind most of their field artillery, the chief anti-tank weapon. As a result, the troops would have little protection against tanks. Based on his experiences in the campaigns in Malaya and Singapore and in the Japanese conquest of Burma in early 1942, Muta Gussi dismissed British and Indian troops as inherently inferior. The troops he had met on those occasions had generally been inadequately trained and led. The Allies had by now largely overcome the administrative and organizational problems which had crippled their early efforts in Burma, and the troops were far better trained and motivated. Prelude to the operation in late February, a local Japanese counterattack was launched against Indian 15th Corps in Arakan, using much the same tactics his Muta Gussi proposed to use. The engagement became known to the Allies as the Battle of the Admin Box. The attack failed when Allied aircraft parachuted supplies to cut off troops, allowing them to stand firm, while the Japanese who had infiltrated behind them ran out of supplies. From this point onwards, the Allies were to place increasing faith and reliance on their transport aircraft. Also, the Japanese unexpectedly encountered a number of Indian tanks, to which the lightly equipped infiltrators had little counter. The planning of Yugo, however, was too far advanced to take account of these developments. Even as the Japanese prepared to launch their attack, the Allies launched the airborne phase of the Second Chindit Expedition on 5 March 1944. Japanese officers such as Major General Noboru Tazo, commanding the Japanese Army Air Force units in Burma, urged Mutaguchi to divert troops from his offensive to secure the Japanese rear areas against the Chindits. Mutaguchi dismissed these concerns, claiming that in a few weeks he would occupy the air bases from which the Chindits were supplied. Opening phases of the battle. When they received intelligence that a major Japanese offensive was impending, Slim and Schoon's planned to withdraw their forward divisions into the Imphal plain and force the Japanese to fight at the end of impossibly long and difficult lines of communication. However, they must judge the date on which the Japanese were to attack, and the strength they would use against some objectives. The Japanese troops began to cross the Chindwin River on the 8th of March. Schoons gave his forward divisions orders to withdraw to Imphal only on the 13th of March. Tamu Shenim, the 20th Indian Division, held Tamu near the Chindwin, and Mori a short distance to the north, where a large supply dump had been established. The lighter Japanese tanks were destroyed. Gracie was opposed to making any retreat, but on the 25th of March he was ordered to detach some of his division to provide a reserve for 4th Corps. As this left the division too weak to hold Tamu and Mori, they withdrew to the Shenim Saddle, a complex of hills through which the Imphal-Tamu road ran. The supply dump at Mori was set ablaze, and 200 cattle there were slaughtered. The division fell back without difficulty, mainly because two of Yamamoto Force's battalions from the Japanese 15th Division were delayed at Indore in northern Burma by the Chindits and were unable to intervene. Tidambishenpa further south, the 17th Indian Division was cut off by the Japanese 33rd Division. Patrols from the division and from V-Force warned Cowan of a Japanese force advancing against the rear of the division as early as the 8th of March, allowing Cowan to regroup the division to protect its rear. On the 13th of March, the Japanese 215th Regiment attacked a supply dump at Milestone 109, 20 miles behind Cowan's leading outposts, while the Japanese 214th Regiment seized Tongzang and a ridge named Tuatam Saddle across the road a few miles behind the 17th Indian Division's main position. The Indian Division began to withdraw on the 14th of March. At Tuatam Saddle, the Japanese 214th Regiment were unable to dig in properly before they were attacked by the 48th Indian Infantry Brigade on the 15th of March. The Japanese suffered heavy casualties and were forced away from the road. Further north, the Japanese captured the depot at Milestone 109 on the 18th of March, but Indian troops recovered it on the 25th of March. Cowan had taken steps to secure the most vulnerable point in the rear of his division, the bridge over the Manipur River. The division's rear guard crossed safely on the 26th of March, demolishing the bridge behind them. The division removed most of the vehicles, food and ammunition from the depot at Milestone 109 before resuming their retreat. Both the Japanese and the Indian Division had suffered heavy casualties. Yanagita, the Japanese 33rd Division's commander, was already pessimistic, and was apparently unnerved by a garbled radio message which suggested that one of his regiments had been destroyed at Tongzang. He therefore did not press the pursuit against the 17th Division, and advanced cautiously in spite of reprimands from Mutaguchi. Scoones had nevertheless been forced to send the bulk of his only reserve, the 23rd Indian Infantry Division, to the aid of the 17th Division. The two divisions, supplied by parachute drops from Allied aircraft, made their way back to the Imphal plain, which they reached on the 4th of April. Sangshak-Lytton. Meanwhile, Imphal had been left vulnerable to the Japanese 15th Division. The only force left covering the northern approaches to the base, Indian 50th Parachute Brigade, was roughly handled in the Battle of Sangshak by a regiment from the Japanese 31st Division on its way to Kohima. The Japanese 60th Regiment cut the main road a few miles north of Imphal on the 28th of March, while the 51st Regiment advanced on Imphal from the northeast, down the valley of the Iril River and a tract from Lytton, 23 miles northeast of Imphal. However, the earlier diversionary attack launched by Japanese 55th Division in Arakan had already failed. Admiral Louis Mountbatten, the commander-in-chief of the Allied Southeast Asia Command, had taken steps to secure aircraft normally assigned to the hump. Slim was able to use these to move the battle-hardened 5th Indian Infantry Division, including all its artillery and first-line transport, by air from Arakan to the Central Front. The move was completed in only 11 days. One brigade and a mountain artillery regiment went to Dimapur in the Brahmaputra Valley, but the other two brigades, the field artillery and the divisional HQ, went to Imphal. The leading troops of the division were in action north and east of Imphal on the 3rd of April. Chin Hills on the Japanese left flank, the INA's Subhash Brigade, led by Shah Nawaz Khan, reached the edge of the Chin Hills below Tidam and Fort White at the end of March. From this position, the 2nd Battalion sent companies to relieve Japanese forces at Phalim and Tahaka, from where in turn, Khan's forces sent out patrols and laid ambushes for the Chin guerrillas under the command of a British officer, taking a number of prisoners. In the middle of May, a force under Khan's adjutant, Mahabub Bubi Ahmed, attacked and captured the hilltop fortress of Klang Klang. The 3rd Battalion meanwhile moved to Fort White Tongzang area in premature anticipation of the destruction of Major General Frank Messavy's 7th Indian Infantry Division in the Arakan, which would allow it to receive volunteers. During the early part of the offensive, a Bahadur group of the INA apparently achieved some success in inducing British Indian soldiers to desert.